Russia thought the reinforced shelters were untouchable. It took Ukraine's drones about 40 minutes to prove otherwise. Russian troops had hidden Iskander tactical missile systems inside reinforced concrete shelters in Crimea. Ukrainian drones managed to penetrate those shelters and strike the systems inside. That single event, on the night of April 28, 2026, cracked open a belief Moscow had quietly relied on for years, that Crimea's buried and hardened infrastructure was simply out of reach. The question this video answers is whether Ukraine has actually turned that crack into a full collapse of Russia's Crimean fortress. The bunkers that Russian forces felt safe inside had reinforced concrete walls 40 to 60 centimeters thick, covered with additional earth. They weren't improvised. They were Soviet-era constructions, built during the Cold War to survive the worst, and Russia repurposed them as the backbone of its short-range strike posture on the peninsula. The Iskander system is a key part of Russia's short-range strike capability, used to target military infrastructure and urban areas across Ukraine. The Special Operations Forces said their drones hit a concealed position on the grounds of a former missile base near the settlement of Ovrazhky, around 40 kilometers east of occupied Simferopol. The site was being used to store operational tactical missile systems that could be launched toward Ukrainian frontline positions and rear cities within minutes. That range matters. The significance of the location lies in its operational reach. From that position, Russian missile units could rapidly launch strikes against both frontline positions and deep rear areas across Ukraine, with minimal warning time. It wasn't just a storage depot, it was a loaded gun pointed at Ukrainian cities, one that Moscow assumed nobody could touch. The operation was supported by data from the underground resistance movement, which had observed Russian forces launching missiles from this specific area on multiple occasions. Ukraine didn't stumble onto this site. It was tracked, documented, and then destroyed. Drone footage released by the Special Operations Forces shows fires burning inside the breached shelters. Those fires were monitored throughout the day by NASA-firmed satellites, which displayed them on a publicly accessible map. The world could watch the bunkers burn from orbit. The Russian-installed so-called governor of Sevastopol, Mikhail Razvozhayev, confirmed the drone attack and claimed that air defense forces had shot down 20 drones during the night. The claim of success came alongside an admission that strikes had reached the peninsula anyway, the kind of contradiction that tells you more than any official denial. So, how did Ukraine's drones get inside walls that thick? That's precisely the question that alarmed Russian military planners, and the answer is where this story turns. Ukraine's middle strike units, the specialized drone formations built specifically to hit targets between 25 and 200 kilometers behind the front, have been quietly maturing into something Russia has no real counter to. Crimea has become the primary focus of Ukraine's middle strike campaign, using mid-range drones to hit Russian targets at operational depth behind the front. These aren't the large, expensive cruise missiles that require Western approval and carefully negotiated range limits. They're Ukrainian-built, mass-produced, and getting smarter with every operational cycle. The Ovrazhky bunker strike on April 28th wasn't the first crack in the armor, and it certainly wasn't the last. It was the most visible proof of concept, the moment the word untouchable stopped meaning anything in Crimea. In response to Ukrainian attacks deep inside Russian-held territory, Russia had relocated air defense systems from Crimean regions to Moscow and the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to the Russian mainland. That relocation was a strategic choice, and it came at a cost. The more Moscow pulled air defenses inward to protect the capital, the more exposed the peninsula became to exactly the kind of sustained, multi-vector drone campaign Ukraine was building. The Kremlin had moved hundreds of launchers for S-400, S-500, and Pantsir systems to the Moscow region alone, and another 90 to Valdai, a resort 450 kilometers north of Moscow. Hundreds of launchers stripped from the periphery to shield the center. Crimea, the prize Russia seized in 2014, was quietly being deprioritized in the air defense calculus. Ukraine exploited that gap immediately. Ukraine used long-range drones to simultaneously hit two important oil facilities on either side of the Kerch Strait: the oil terminal in Kerch on Crimea and the port of Kavkaz in Russia. The facilities are used to ferry fuel to Russian front lines. Ukraine managed to disable 4 S-400 missile complexes and 2 Pantsir systems specifically to enable the strike on Kerch, which is less than 1 kilometer from the heavily defended Kerch Bridge. That's not luck. That's a suppression of air defenses operation executed close enough to a bridge Russia treats as a national symbol that the explosions could be filmed from the bridge itself. The Crimean occupation governor, Sergei Aksyonov, immediately suspended fuel sales to all but state services. In Sevastopol, the largest Crimean city, fuel had already been rationed to 20 liters per week for private individuals. 20 liters. That's a week's allowance in a city that once hosted millions of Russian tourists and the entire Black Sea Fleet simultaneously. Ukraine struck Russian air defense systems and military airfield infrastructure in occupied Crimea on June 24th. Drone operators from the Alpha Special Operations Center carried out strikes on infrastructure in the Kerch Strait area, as well as at the Saki and Hvardivka military airfields. The operation damaged 4 aircraft storage hangars at the Saki military airfield. Then came the underground infrastructure. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces continued their drone campaign over occupied Crimea on June 19 and overnight into June 20, striking energy facilities on the peninsula. The commander of Ukraine's unmanned forces, Robert Brovdy, posted footage of the 414th Brigade striking the Hlibivka underground gas storage facility in western Crimea. Underground, again. The Hlibivka storage site plays an important role in supplying natural gas to Crimea, helping regulate seasonal demand and maintain pressure within the peninsula's gas transportation network. Damage to the facility could complicate energy distribution and support infrastructure. Russia built that facility underground for exactly the same reason it buried the Iskander bunkers, because underground meant safe. That assumption is gone. Since the beginning of July, Ukrainian drones struck 38 energy infrastructure facilities in temporarily occupied Crimea and the occupied parts of the Donbass. A statement published on July 6th confirmed the widespread power outage followed a sustained campaign targeting Russian-controlled energy infrastructure. 38 strikes in 6 days. That's not a campaign, that's a siege. Occupation authorities acknowledged a blackout affecting all cities and districts of Crimea, including Simferopol. All cities and districts. The peninsula-wide blackout wasn't a side effect, it was the point. Then the airfields took the next blow. The Security Service of Ukraine carried out a successful strike on the Saki military airfield in temporarily occupied Crimea on July 1st. The operation targeted the airfield's infrastructure, including hangars housing fighter jets. 5 hits on hangars where military aircraft were being stored were confirmed. 2 of the hangars contained Su-30 and Su-30SM fighter jets at the time of the strike. A fire was reported in the hangar housing the Su-30SM, indicating a successful destruction. The estimated value of each aircraft ranges from 30 to 50 million United States dollars, depending on configuration. Ukraine wasn't finished. The Security Service of Ukraine said on July 3rd it had struck 2 Russian military air bases in occupied Crimea overnight, damaging or destroying at least 7 military aircraft. Its second reported attack on the Saki air base within a single week. Ukrainian drones struck 7 hangars at the Saki air base where Russia stores Su-30SM, Su-30, and Su-24 fighter and bomber aircraft. The strike destroyed or damaged at least 7 aircraft. The Security Service also reported hitting 2 hangars at the Hvardivka air base, where Russia stored Shahed attack drones and aviation equipment. Storing aircraft inside hardened hangars rather than leaving them exposed on open tarmac is meant to protect against exactly this type of attack. But a hangar only protects an aircraft from strikes it can actually stop. That sentence is the verdict on every hardened or reinforced facility Russia built in Crimea. Hardened only means something until the weapon gets through. Now, here's the honest counter case. Russia hasn't simply collapsed in Crimea. It still has options, and dismissing them would be wrong. Putin may convince himself this is another recoverable dip in the war's fortunes, that Russia will match Ukraine's drone proficiencies and improve the pace at which it grabs territory. Russia continues to launch mass drone attacks of its own, and its defense industry is still producing. The ferry route across the Kerch Strait, though struck repeatedly, has not been permanently severed. Belarus refinery capacity provides some fuel redundancy for Russian-held territories. But the counter case narrows quickly when you look at the pattern. The number of successful Ukrainian strikes against targets in Russia has increased by 1,150% since the beginning of the year. In June alone, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, together with other military units, reportedly destroyed or seriously damaged 172 Russian defense industry and fuel and energy facilities, as well as nearly 3,000 additional military targets. That number doesn't fit a narrative of Russian resilience. It fits a narrative of accelerating degradation. Ukraine's growing arsenal of long-range strike drones has repeatedly proven capable of penetrating fortified Crimean infrastructure that Russian planners once considered reasonably secure. The word "once" is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Reasonably secure, past tense. The April 28th bunker strike didn't just destroy Iskander systems. It retired a concept. The concept that reinforced concrete in Crimea bought Russia safety it couldn't find elsewhere. Ukraine's defense minister said on June 17th that the drone campaign is turning the peninsula into an island, as Kyiv attempts to isolate Crimea from the rest of Russia with strikes on supply chains. An island without power, without sufficient fuel, without functioning air defenses around its most important targets, and without the guarantee that anything buried underground is actually protected. That's what Crimea looks like today, not the unsinkable aircraft carrier Putin described when he annexed it in 2014, but a peninsula being methodically stripped of the infrastructure it needs to project force. The hardened bunkers were the last argument. If Ukrainian drones can burn Iskander launchers inside walls 40 to 60 centimeters thick, covered in earth, then no asset in Crimea is protected by its casing alone. Russia's Crimean fortress isn't impenetrable, it's just increasingly expensive to defend, and the bill is being paid in aircraft, fuel, power, and the quiet credibility that untouchable ever meant anything at all. Here are the two questions this story leaves genuinely open. Can Russia rebuild and harden its Crimean air defenses fast enough to stop Ukraine's drone campaign from expanding further? Or has the gap become too wide to close? And if Ukraine continues to isolate Crimea as a functioning military base, does that shift the strategic calculus enough to change how this war ends? Or does Russia simply absorb the losses and fight on from the mainland? Tell me what you think. Drop it in the comments below. And if you want this kind of analysis every time the map shifts, subscribe so you don't miss it.